everyone, my name is Madison Franks and I am an animal science pre-vet student at Oklahoma State University. I'm also a quail hunter and am very passionate about quail conservation. Today I will be presenting about eyeworms in bobwhite quail. Now, it's easy for us to see the problem with eyeworms in bobwhite quail, but for quail with eyeworms it's not so easy to see. So, over the course of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what eyeworms are, because unfortunately that is not common knowledge and it is a somewhat obscure issue, although it should not be, in my opinion. I'm also going to talk about how eyeworms are spread and, most importantly, what we can do to control them. So, just so we're all on the same page, I'm going to start off by telling you exactly what eyeworms are. They are parasitic nematodes that live in the eyes and sinuses of bobwhite quail, where they feed on blood from the quail, as nematodes generally do. They range in size from 1/8 of an inch to roughly the diameter of a penny, and while that may not seem huge on paper, it is equivalent to a person having a worm the size of a toothpick living and moving in and behind their eyes. Now, I don't know about you, but that's something I wouldn't wish on my enemies, much less on my wildlife. According to the Texas Tech Wildlife Toxicology Lab, infections of up to 40 to 50 worms per bird are unfortunately fairly common. And as you can imagine, when a bird has that many worms in its eyes, it impairs its vision severely. And this causes it to run into things when it is trying to escape predators, and also affects its ability to detect predators in the first place. Because of this, heavy eyeworm infections tend to kind of kick quail while they're down, so to speak, and because of that, they are suspected to be a major contributor to the great quail decline, because they kind of tend to kick quail while they're down and hurt them when everything else is going wrong. So, as you can see, eyeworms are a horrible plague on our quail population. But the question is, how do they get them in the first place? Because it seems like having worms in your eyes seems like something that would be fairly hard to accomplish. But unfortunately for quail, it is not. Because eyeworms are spread through crickets and grasshoppers. This is very, very unfortunate, because crickets and grasshoppers are one of the best sources of protein for a quail. A nice juicy grasshopper is the quail equivalent of filet mignon. They love them, and they provide much needed protein that these quail have to survive, thrive, and grow. Now, when a quail ingests a grasshopper, the eyeworms in their larval form will migrate from the quail's crop to the quail's eyes in as little to 30 minutes, according to the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch. So it does not take very much time at all for a quail to consume a grasshopper and then become infected with eyeworms. Now, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to prevent quail from consuming infected insects and then becoming infected with eyeworms themselves, because once they have developed an infection, the eyeworm eggs are passed on through their feces, and then those quail feces are consumed by more grasshoppers and crickets and roaches, and unfortunately the cycle continues. But the question remains, how can we stop them? Because we've got to do something, clearly. Thankfully, the people at the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch, the Park City Quail Coalition, and the Texas Tech Toxicology Lab have developed a medicated feed specifically for eyeworms and quail called Quail Guard. This feed is going to be affordably priced, so as many people can have access to it as possible. And I know what you're thinking. Usually when you set out a feeder for quail, every other animal that comes along also tries to have access to it and stick their finger in the cake, so to speak. And thankfully, the researchers have thought of that also, and they've developed a quail feeder specifically designed to prevent any other animal from having access to the feed. So not only are you going to waste as little feed as possible through using this feeder, but you're also minimizing the risk of any other animal consuming the medication in that feed. Now, according to the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch, this Quail Guard feed is set to be approved for public use sometime later in 2020, so hopefully this year may bring something good after all. So, hopefully now that we have this end in sight, we can finally find a solution to this problem that's been plaguing our quail for as long as we've known about quail. So, in conclusion, eyeworms are parasitic nematodes that live in the eyes and sinuses of quail. They're passed on through crickets and grasshoppers that quail consumed, and while we can't prevent quail from consuming those insects, we have developed a medicated feed that is able to eradicate the eyeworms once they're inside the birds. So, hopefully, now that we have a solution in sight, our quail will finally be able to see again after all. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before you today. If anyone has any questions, I can take them now.